In the 1960s, this obscure backstreet was the place to be in swinging London. Mason's Yard in Mayfair was home to Indica Gallery, an arty hangout for the Beatles. Paul McCartney was a regular, and John Lennon met Yoko Ono here. Now 40 years later, Indica has reopened. Barry Miles opened the first incarnation with John Dunbar in 1965. It embraced experimental art and the avant-garde.
Paul McCartney, who was living on the top floor in a little attic room, and next door was Peter Asher's sort of wonderful L-shaped room, all done out in Norwegian wood and everything. And then there was this little maid's room with McCartney in a single bed. And so McCartney was intimately involved with the bookshop and the art gallery from day one.
The reborn Indica has again embraced the spirit of the avant-garde and experimental art that is adventurous and often obscure.
I just noticed the sound from downstairs, and it gave the whole thing a very interesting soundtrack, I think.
But the most famous story to emerge from the early Indica is that it was the birthplace of one of the 20th century's great love stories. John Lennon and Yoko Ono. Yoko was a conceptual artist in her own right, and the two met before the opening of her own exhibition. Lennon signed the visitor's book with the address of his mansion in Weybridge.
It wasn't, in fact, the opening, it was the day before the private view, when we were still installing the show. So there were only 6 or 7 people there, probably. And, but Yoko, very quickly, of course, latched onto John Lennon and showed him around and, you know, explained what each piece was. And John Lennon was a little suspicious of almost anything avant-garde in those days. I mean, until he got together with Yoko, he was always very concerned that someone was trying to pull a fast one or, you know, con him in some way. And, but I mean, he liked the whimsical side of Yoko's work and the obvious sort of Zen koan connections and stuff. I mean, it was had she not been Oriental, I think he might have been more suspicious, but he could see the cultural background of the work. So he really seemed to enjoy it, and I only really remember it because, I mean, we were just putting up the show, and so for John to show up was a bit of an interruption, really. And Yoko was very keen on him, and they were having a very good conversation together. So when John was about to leave, she in fact tried to get into the car with him to drive off. But I think Lennon had been up all night the night before or something, and too tired.
For Beatles fans, that night has been etched into history. Some familiar sights came out of it. This was Apple, a Yoko creation. Co-founder John Dunbar says the original Indica was in the right place at the right time.
It was utterly different, yes. There was nothing like it. They were all rather intimidating, kind of Mayfair type suits, kind of not very inviting, and selling basically rather, you know, well-known artists of the 50s. Now there are many galleries dealing with this kind of many artists making art which is not paintings on walls, as it were. And at that time there was very little else. So, you know, quite how direct the influence was, or whether it was just in the air anyway, I mean, who's to tell?
Lillian Lynn is an artist who was with Indica in the early days and was one of the first exhibitors in the new century.
It didn't last, but I think it was kind of like a cosmic flare, which is what this piece is called. You know, flares are bright and dynamic. They put out a lot of energy, but they don't last.